starting in Maine was really cool because we actually have a U.S. bicycle route in Maine. So that's USBR1. You see the green sign there for, and that's one of the programs in the organization where we work with and are the technical advisors to state DOTs across the country. So the goal of the USBRS, which is what we call it shorthand, is to have essentially an interstate bicycle travel network.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Active Towns channel. My name is John Simmerman, and that is Jennifer Hamelman, formerly with the Adventure Cycling Association. We're going to be talking about some of her work that she had done in terms of developing the cycling routes across North America. We're also going to be heading down memory lane, talking about an adventure that she took, heading from Maine through Minneapolis several years ago. And having some fun, talking a little bit about that experience and some of the characters that you meet along the way. And that's really the key, is the human connections that you make. But before we dive into that, I just want to say, if you're enjoying this content here on the Active Towns channel, please consider supporting my efforts by becoming an Active Towns ambassador. Super easy to do. Just click on the join button right here on YouTube down below, or become an Active Towns ambassador via Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, YouTube Super Thanks, as well as making contributions to the nonprofit. You can do that by heading over to activetowns.org. Click on the support tab at the top of the page. Okay, let's get right to it with Jennifer. Jennifer Hamelman, thank you so much for joining me on the Active Towns podcast.
Pleasure to be here with you today, John. Thanks for inviting me.
Now, Jennifer, I love giving my guests an opportunity to introduce themselves. So who the heck is Jennifer?
So I'm Jennifer Hamelman, and I have been a part of adventure cycling for close to 25 years. I recently have stepped away from that organization, but my passion and my interest still is quite keen into the bicycle travel world. And I am quite proud of the work that I and the organization did in the time that we were working together.
Yeah, so wow, 25 years at that organization. For those people who don't really know, and you and I didn't even have this conversation, my audience truly is an international audience. So on any given episode, you're going to be speaking with folks throughout Central Europe, down under, as well as here in North America. But yeah, can you explain a little bit about the organization? Who the heck is the organization, and what it sort of evolved into over the last 25 years?
Yeah, sure. So adventure cycling actually has a really long history. 2026 will be the 50th anniversary of the founding of the organization, which started with two intrepid couples traveling from Alaska to Argentina. And there's a whole backstory that goes with that. But one of the things that came out of it was they had this idea to create a really exciting event the event ended up calling it Bicentennial, which was celebrating the bicentennial of the country in 1976. They thought it would be super cool to have people ride their bicycles from coast to coast, celebrating this anniversary of the country. And from that event, the organization was born. And it's all about inspiring and empowering people to travel by bicycle. There's over 40,000 miles of mapped routes all around the U.S., with a handful of miles in Canada. And they're published on printed maps. Now, I know that's a bit of a quaint idea at this point in time, because so many people's lives all depend on, the computer they carry in their pocket, their mobile device, their cell phone. And adventure cycling has made great strides in making the routes available via that medium as well. A recent partnership with Ride with GPS has really expanded that opportunity. And Ride with GPS is another one of those organizations that has bicycle travel and commuting and just getting around by bike and sharing routes, part of their mission of their organization, their company. So that's that's the heart of it for me at the organization. Of course, we do other things, or they do other things. I'm still in that transition place where it's still we for me, because I've, was there for so long.
You earned that. You earned that for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
And
You
I am a
mentioned
life member, so.
yes, exactly. Yeah. And that's a good thing to point out is that, yeah, this is a nonprofit organization, but this is also a membership organization. And part of the benefits that you do get as being a member is you do have access at a reduced rate, a lot of the resources that are available. And you guys are a wonderful advocacy organization, member organization that is working hand in hand with a lot of other like-minded organizations, including like the Rails to Trails Conservancy, and especially, and we'll be talking about some of the the longer routes that are being established. And so there's a few organizations that have been doing a lot of heavy lifting over the past few decades. We've had Bill Nesper on from the League of American Bicyclists before, LAB, on. You mentioned the two couples, and one of the two couples with the Burdens. We had Dan Burden on the channel not too long ago for on bike interview. So yeah, just a super, super fun and exciting legacy. And a big part of the routes that you guys have put together, and yes, they really are on these paper maps. Now, I think there's a digitization process, and you guys are working with to get many of these into various formats. Is that correct?
Well, for a long time, we've offered the routes as GPX data for folks to be able to put on like their Garmin device, or now you can get apps to go on your phone to take that data. But this past spring, earlier in this year, we launched a partnership with Ride with GPS to distribute those routes. And the really remarkable thing for me in that partnership is the platform that Ride with GPS offered allowed us to bring forward all of the aspects of the paper maps, whereas the GPX data is just data for the routes and the services. But with Ride with GPS, they've got a platform within their platform called Experiences that allowed us to bring all of the other features of the paper printed maps, which includes some field notes and backstory and riding conditions that tells people, when you're riding a route of over 300 miles, there's always going to be some place where there's going to be a little bit of a glitch, or there's going to be something that a cyclist needs to be aware of in advance, like, park roads that are closed certain hours of the day, or particularly high traffic, maybe at particular times of the day on certain sections of the route. So that's information that would be included in the riding conditions. And so being able to include that with the Ride with GPS product is really important. And so that's, part of what was important to us in creating that partnership, was being able to give the full experience of the paper maps in a digital format. And then, of course, the ability to be able to play with the routes a little bit, because it's pretty rare that anybody will ride a 3,000-mile route from start to finish following exactly every mile. Someone is, Aunt Jane lives 40 miles off my route. So, of course, I'm going to find a way to go see Aunt Jane when I'm on this big trip, right?
Of course.
So that takes me off route and then back on route. And so we try to give, the ability to have that flexibility through that Ride with GPS product. So.
I love it. And we're zoned in on the Portland, and we didn't mention that, but yeah, you're not up in Missoula, Montana anymore. You're actually in Oregon these days. Yeah.
Yeah. I actually live in Beaverton there, right on the map. So it's a metro area of Portland. So yeah, my family is here.
And that really does make it a rich experience to have these maps and these experiences in association and in partnership with Ride with GPS. And I know that this was a long time coming. Were you involved with that process of trying to make this a reality?
Yeah. I was intimately involved in that process of working with Ride with GPS, the figuring out how it was going to work, how our data mapped to use a pun, I guess, mapped to their product so that we could present things effectively for our users. And, I had a marvelous team that just really churned out all of that data. Over 50,000 miles of mapped routes needed to get put into this system. And my team was amazing in how we just churned through all of the issues that come up in that process, because there's always going to be something. That's what technology, that's just the nature of technology, right? You're going to run into things that are out of your norm. And so you have to figure out, how do you manage that in this situation, and how often are we going to have to manage that? And it was definitely a process, and it's pretty exciting to see. And the other really beautiful thing of partnering with Ride with GPS is, as you said, this is an international audience of bicycle travel, and so for folks using Ride with GPS, they can now discover adventure cycling and our adventure cycling route network via Ride with GPS, which is a new avenue for the organization to reach out to people and to create that community. Because it's definitely about more than just the maps and the routes, but it's a community building experience for sure.
Yeah. I'm sort of zooming in and honing in on a route and a trip that you did relatively recently. Or I don't know, when was that trip? Was it relatively recently?
It was in 2017.
Okay.
It took a long time for the it took a long time for the long distance bug to get me. Some folks come to the organization having already done long distance bicycle travel, and I had only done really supported kinds of trips.
Yeah.
And at the 40th anniversary, I got really inspired by all the people who showed up to celebrate with the organization. And before I even realized it, out of my mouth came the words, "I'm going to do a big trip." And then I turned and looked over my shoulder, and one of our board members was standing right there. And I went, "Oh my, he's going to make sure I do this big trip." And he sure enough did. So,
yeah, that's funny too. I was going to say it's funny too, because when I asked Jim Sayer was the former executive director for some time. He retired a few years ago, but when he started getting out on the road and doing that, I asked him, I said, "Jim, why? Why now?" And he's like, "I've been like a part of this organization. I've been living in Missoula, Montana, and around brushing shoulders with this organization for so many years, but I haven't done any of these real trips myself." And so he caught the bug. He started doing them, and now I think he might be kind of addicted to them. But
I think so.
Yeah. So yeah. I get what you mean by It took a while for that bug to bite you and get out there on the road doing these. Now, you mentioned some supported trips. So before we dive into this trip, talk a little bit about that too, because that's one of the products that the organization does offer, is being able to not only just have the network and the maps, and now with the Ride with GPS, but you also have supported adventures as well. Right.
Yeah, and actually, so our tours department offers a number of different tours every year, and the support on those tours actually really varies. Now, we have everything from events where your gear is carried, meals are prepared for you, there's lunch stops, all of that stuff is handled. Pretty much all you do is ride and take care of your tent. Those are your big things you worry about all day. All the way to the very other end, where we do offer self-contained trips, where you have about 12 to 14 people come together. You get a leader, the maps or digital navigation, and some group gear. And so everybody cooks together, you cook meals together, you grocery shop together, you camp, together in your campgrounds. And those are typically longer trips from 20 days to up to 90 days to get all the way across country on our Trans-America Trail route, which I failed to mention in the introduction. That's the flagship route, is the Trans-America Trail, or the Trans Am as we call it. And it goes from Astoria, Oregon to Yorktown, Virginia. And it's about 4,000 miles to get across the country. So it's definitely no adventure cycling route can ever be accused of being the most direct route between between points, because that is definitely not the goal. It's not the goal to be efficient. It's to be, taking in the sights and the most appropriate infrastructure as possible.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, let's do this. Let's pop back over to the start of your trip. Since we teased it, we want to make sure that we give this adventure from 2017 its due time. And so so here you are. You're at Route 1. What state are we in?
We are in Maine. So the goal of this trip was to go essentially Portland to Seattle the long way is what I called it. So I started in Cape Elizabeth, Maine, and the goal was to get all the way to Seattle. Unfortunately, I don't know if you remember, but 2017 was one of the really bad fire years. Eastern Washington and Idaho were just on fire. So I ended up ending my trip in Minnesota because at that point in time, I was getting on a train because I didn't have enough time to ride the whole thing. So I was going to take a train across the Dakotas and then pick it back up in Washington State. So the Dakotas and Montana. And I decided I was going to just call it because trying to ride in that smoke, and I just didn't want to deal with it. And I had accomplished everything I had wanted to accomplish when I set out on the trip. So, but starting in Maine was really cool because we actually have a U.S. bicycle route in Maine. So that's USBR1. You see the green sign there for, and that's one of the programs in the organization where we work with and are the technical advisors to state DOTs across the country. So the goal of the USBRS, which is what we call it shorthand, is to have essentially an interstate bicycle travel network. And these routes are designated on a state-by-state basis, and it has to go through the state DOT. There's a process, an application, much agreements that get created. We work with advocates and small community groups, as well as the DOT and other regional agencies that may own the pavement. That's the important part, is we have to figure out who owns the route that we're going to use and get their agreement that it's okay to be part of this system. And the sort of beautiful thing about the system is that there's absolutely no cost. I mean, it takes some staff time. That definitely is a cost, but it's signage is not required, although it's a lovely bonus to be able to navigate from sign to sign, but it's not required. There's actually no cash outlay for creating a USBRS route. And so the map that you have shown here is the corridor plan. And so all of those dark lines are the miles that have been designated. Currently, there's over 23,000 miles across the U.S., so we're almost halfway to the stated goal of 50,000 miles. And then there's some lighter colored lines, and those represent potential USBRS routes. So they're sort of in a corridor. They're not necessarily aligned with specific infrastructure, but they're a place where a route could go. And many of these routes are actually at least loosely based on adventure cycling routes. If you were to interpose the two maps together, you would see that they are very close in a lot of places. But oftentimes, the USBRS routes will differ from an adventure cycling route because of that whole agreement process. It may be that, a jurisdiction who owns the roadway that they want to designate the route on, they actually would prefer that it be on a different road for whatever reason. And so that'll cause them to not be in alignment with each other.
Right. Fantastic. What's interesting too is when we look at some of these, maps of the different systems. Let's pull up the interactive map here, and we take a look at this. And when I look at the interactive maps, and when I look at these types of systems that you all have been involved with, putting together, it reminds me of the Eurovelo routing system that the European Cyclist Federation has put together over the years. And a couple of years ago, I had the outgoing CEO Jill Warren on to talk about the Eurovelo and all of that. I mean, a lot of people might be surprised to learn that there even exists, some of these routes and systems, and some of them formalized within state DOTs and some not. This is really cool to think that, especially in a country as vast and wide open as the United States, that we actually could reasonably, as just a normal person who wants to go out for a ride, maybe a long ride, be able to take advantage of these routes.
Right. Yeah. And definitely the USBRS in some ways was patterned after the idea of Eurovelo, and past staff worked with folks in Europe, different countries, around how they established those routes and the signage and waymarking and tourism aspects and economic aspects. So definitely that was always sort of an unspoken goal, is that we wanted to build the USBRS to be as robust and as easy to use as the Eurovelo network.
One of the fabulous things that I have noticed in all my years of traveling in Europe, and I tend to travel by train and Brompton bicycle, but once I'm established in a city and I'm zipping around and filming throughout the city on my Brompton bicycle, I will also ride from city to city to city on these wonderful established pathways. Oftentimes they're along canals or through the countryside, and making those connections. So I have choice. I have mobility choice. I can choose to get on the train to get from city to city, or I can ride from city to city. And so, although I've never done sort of like bike camping and set up with a touring setup like this, where I've got my own accommodations and my tent and all of that, and the ability to cook my own food, blah, 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 I have traveled from city to city, via Brompton with literally all my luggage. As I'm transferring from one city to the next, I could have easily taken the train, but I choose to use the Brompton. And so I think that's really a wonderful opportunity for us to realize that in North America, we can establish safe and inviting, all ages and abilities, cycle network facilities that can connect village to village. And one of the great things that we have the opportunity to do is enhance some of these small villages and small towns that may be on economic tough times, and be able to instill a fair amount of vibrancy and vitality to them by having a bunch of folks that are wanting to ride through and spend money in their community.
Yeah. I mean, that is definitely something that was really inspiring to me about the work of bicycle travel at Adventure Cycling. And that's like that economic piece that kind of comes as a quote unquote fringe benefit of bicycle travel and the published maps and the published routes. You can drive or take a train 200 miles, and there's an opportunity to spend money at the beginning and at the end, but not much in between. But if you're riding a bike over 200 miles, that's going to take you 3, 4, 5 days, depending on, circumstances. And you're going to need to eat along the way, because food is fuel for a cyclist. You're going to need someplace to stay. You may just need to hang out someplace for a little while. So we include things like libraries on the maps, which libraries were a great resource for me because it rained
Right.
a lot on my trip. This bluebird sky day was not something I experienced often in the first 3 weeks of my trip.
Right.
So, it's really impressive, I guess, to think about the actual power of bicycle travel, because a lot of the routes from adventure cycling go through really rural communities. And those sales that the mom and pop grocery store gets from the 10 cyclists that come through in a week's period or whatever can really make a difference at to their bottom line. And that's something that people oftentimes don't think about, is that impact that ripples out from one person riding their bike a long distance. They actually leave in their wake a nice little financial bonus for folks. And the people who own those businesses oftentimes get really excited and want to do things to support, like, they'll have rags out or a pump, or, they'll have a selection of tubes that they keep behind the counter for flat tires, and, snack bars and ice cream. And, they just, and some of them actually keep ledgers so you can, sign in. And so that's, very exciting. Sort of community building as well. You can see who came before you, and yeah.
Yeah, I had Heidi Byerly on to talk about her experience riding across the country. Yeah. And of course, she not only did she write a book about her experience and all that, but while she was going across, that was part of the angle that she was looking at, was that economic impact on these small businesses. And she was carrying around some of the adventures cycling stickers. What is it? A route-friendly business, or what was the sticker that the adventure cycling businesses that they put in their window to say that we're welcoming to you bicycle tours?
Essentially, I think they were decals for the Trans-America Trail route. Yeah, exactly.
Perfect. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we worked with her a number of years ago on that. That was really cool.
It was a few years ago. Now we're sort of hanging out here on this particular main shot from the beginning of your trip, but I want to zoom in because I want to focus in on this combination of signs here. You already addressed the USB. The USBRS, is that what it is? US Bicycle? Yeah, okay. But there's also another sign on here, and it is the East Coast Greenway. And we've featured the East Coast Greenway here on the channel before. Introduce the East Coast Greenway and the fact that they're overlapping, and that's a good part about the beauty of some of these routes that are out there, is oftentimes you're overlapping and they become co-branded because there's other institutions and organizations that are curating some of these routes.
Sure. So adventure cycling routes, when they're created, we can route a route on anything that it's legal to ride a bicycle on. And so we take advantage of any and all kinds of infrastructure. The East Coast Greenway is based on the idea of wanting a route that goes north to south, from border to border, essentially. But their goal is to have it all be on separated pathways. So it gives you more of that 8 to 80 experience, where families and riders of all abilities can take advantage of that system quite easily. Whereas an adventure cycling route, we are building more routes and creating more routes that are more beginner friendly, but oftentimes these longer distance routes require somebody to have, a little bit more of experience of a cyclist to be on the routes, because we do use such varied infrastructure. And what's really exciting for me about the East Coast Greenway is that another program at Adventure Cycling is called Short Routes, which is community-generated routes that are anywhere from, I think it's 25 to 250 miles. And we share those via the Ride with GPS platform. But we actually partnered with East Coast Greenway, I think it's been about a year ago now, so that they could feature sections of the East Coast Greenway that they really think are prominent and very easily accessible. The pieces that are complete and tell a really great story. And so we worked with them to highlight some of those routes on our Short Routes program. And so those routes become more accessible to more people, and again, tries to grow the community. And it was really fun to partner with them. And, we did a webinar and did joint press releases and things. And my understanding is that they want to feature more routes on the Short Route system as well. So
yeah. And we're zooming in on the East Coast, which is part of course, the East Coast Greenway system. And so, yeah, speaking of that, there are some of the different short routes, and the short routes have a different color coding to them. So you can kind of see how that works. That's brilliant.
Right.
How so much fun. Because, yeah, I mean, it's a great way to get your intro into maybe doing a larger distance thing, is to take advantage of the shorter routes and get, and shorter is all relative, because everybody, to one person, a short route is, 200 miles, as you mentioned earlier. And for another person, a short route is, that first 10 or 20 miles.
Right. Yeah. And that's the whole idea of the short routes, is to make it more accessible no matter where you're at in your cycling journey. Right. So
the experience that you have when you're out on the road, we'll get back to our shot here in Maine. Talk a little bit about that experience, because that's, to me, one of the great stories that kind of bubbles up out of these longer distance trips. And for the listening only audience, why don't you describe what's on screen here?
Yeah, so it's a sign that I encountered at one of the first campgrounds I stayed at, and it says, "Believe there is good in the world." And then the way it's arranged, they have it highlighted also to be the good. And that is, both of those sentiments definitely reflect my experience and the experience of the folks who come through the adventure cycling office every summer. That getting to meet people face to face and talk to them one to one, I came to believe deeply that most people, most of the time, want to do the good or right thing. They want to be helpful. And I had no idea how unbelievably important that would be for me going forward, to have that stand that most people, most of the time, want to do the right thing. And the people along these routes, they understand that as well. I had people offer me coffee in the morning at campgrounds, and water I'd stop at a convenience store and people would hand me bottles of water. That was a piece of advice I was given actually when I left, was even if you don't need it, if somebody offers you something, take it and say thank you. It will make their day and yours. And so I did that a number of times. I there were a couple of times when I would treat myself to a hot breakfast in a restaurant, a few miles down the road, and I would go to pay my bill and my server would say, well, actually, the gentleman sitting over in that corner on his way out paid your bill. And so, it was, those kinds of things happened. I wouldn't say every day, but they happened regularly enough that it was a really lovely boost, and it felt good to be seen and recognized in those ways.
And I think it's a super good reminder in today's reality of such division in our world and in politics and all of this. Ryan Van Duzer, who of course has his wonderful channel, the Duzer channel, he travels all over the world. And one of the themes that he continually harps on is just how much good there is out there in the world. And he'll be writing in countries where, if you believed the news media, you'd think, how did you survive? Why weren't you murdered multiple times over? And, and he tries to really emphasize that no matter if you're riding, cross country in a foreign land or here in the United States, you will run across people from all different walks of life. And if you are open to it, you'll find that there's plenty of things in common that you can connect with. And the great thing about a bike and traveling at human speed and being rather conspicuous with your bike and all your gear and all that at a restaurant or whatever, is that you're able to connect at a human level. And I think that that's so incredibly important in today's day and age. In our world now, where, over the last 120 years of being car-centric and car-dominated, we tend to seal ourselves in these hermetically sealed metal boxes on wheels. and that disconnects us from other people. So being able to, walk and bike to meaningful destinations and places at closer to human speeds, we're able to make more connections. And I think that's really, really important.
Definitely. Definitely. And, I had talked to enough people who had done these big trips that I wasn't overly concerned about my safety doing this by myself. Because I did do the trip, most of it by myself. And I had friends and family who were very concerned about me and my safety because they hadn't experienced bicycle travel before and they didn't understand that sense of how it can be person to person. And, the vulnerability that you bring by traveling by bicycle and the goodness that can bring out in other people. Yes, this was one of my rainy days. I believe I was entering Vermont there. Yeah, I got very friendly with my rain jacket. It barely ever dried out. I swear, for like the first 3 weeks, it rained every single day for some part of the day. I woke up several times in puddles around my tent, but thankfully not inside. So that was good. Yeah.
Yeah. I zoomed out just a little bit. Yeah, it's New Hampshire.
So we're in New Hampshire. Yeah. I think I have a similar picture of Vermont. So
Vermont too. Yeah, like you said, it rained a lot. Well, and I'm glad we have this opportunity to talk a little bit about rain and a little bit about being out in the elements. And it's a good reminder for us humans that we have become addicted to comfort. And it's also a good reminder that contrary to popular belief, we don't dissolve, we don't melt when exposed to water. Just imagine every time you shower, you don't magically disappear. And so if we get a little bit wet, I mean, the Dutch have a saying is like, there is no such thing as bad weather, just inappropriate clothing. And so, yes, invest in a nice rain jacket, etc. And if you do get a little damp, guess what? You'll dry out. And, having the ability to be pragmatic and safe, being able to know where to go, like a library, like you mentioned earlier, of, if it does get really, really bad and dangerously bad, don't ride in a lightning storm, people. Don't be stupid, take care of yourself, but you're not going to melt. Don't worry. Yep.
Keep going. You'll stay warm. Yeah. So this Kankamangas Pass, I had to include this photo because this was the worst, best, hardest day of my trip. This is one of the iconic passes that cyclists in the region, that they have to do it. And it came fairly early in my trip, so I didn't have my sea legs perhaps fully under me. It happened to be a really unseasonably warm day. I think it got up to 90 degrees that day. And I did think I was going to melt along the side of the road. And it's one of my best memories, even though, it was a super hard day. I actually was sharing the road all that day. It was the last day of what in New Hampshire they call Bikers Month, but it wasn't cyclists, it was motorcycles. So I was tracked by folks riding Harleys all day long. And some of them were really quite supportive and they would cheer me on as they went by, and I struggled to get my pedals around. But yeah, when I think about it now, you look at that 2,855 feet, that's not that, the Rockies, come on, the Rockies are way bigger than that. But this was intense because they're short, steep, repeating climbs. Now you would climb up a short bit, then you go down. You got to climb up a short bit and you go down. It was brutal. And I'm quite proud of myself for having made it all the way to the top.
So in 2017, were you living in Montana at that time?
I was.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you had a little bit of altitude because Missoula is what, 5,000 feet or so?
I think it's around 3,500.
Okay. So it's a little lower than Boulder, but still at elevation there. And so you know what it's like to climb mountains, but at the same time, it's different when you're out there. You've got all your gear and you're several days in and you're tired and you don't necessarily have your climbing legs yet. But something that you said there is really, really important, worth highlighting, is that difficult things, these tough days, make the memory that much sweeter.
Right. For sure. Yeah. It was, and, I made it through on my own grit. And at the same time, I was near the top, and I felt like I was about to just bonk, and I reached out and I called a friend where I'd had really spotty cell coverage all day. She was actually also in a spotty coverage area, so I shouldn't have been able to reach her, but I did. And that 5-minute conversation that we had got me that last quarter of a mile to the top of the pass. So, I mean, there's absolutely nothing wrong also with reaching out and asking for a little support when you need it in those tough times too.
I think that's a really good thing to hone in on is, have that lifeline, that you can, dial a friend and be able to get that, encouraging voice and have that. Before we talk a little bit about this particular sign, in fact, let's go backwards, to this image and I'll pose this because earlier you had mentioned, you did this solo, you went out as a single female out there riding. Heidi and I had this conversation because she talks about it in the book too, about how, people would say, you're doing what? Aren't you afraid? What about the danger? Dive a little deeper into that in terms of the things that you did, which were pragmatic, that, made you feel like, okay, I don't do anything stupid, but at the same time, yes, a single, female, powerful female can do this. You don't have to feel like, oh, you have to have an entourage around you to be safe in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it takes, for me, I needed to do a little bit of practicing. So I did a couple of bike overnights locally, practiced, made sure I knew how my stove worked. And because I carried a stove, I cooked my own food most of the time. I knew how my tent worked. I knew my gear was all in good shape. I knew the basics of how my bicycle worked, and I had a handful of tools that I didn't necessarily know how they worked, but I knew they went with my bike, and I just needed to find somebody who did know how they worked, because I did a route that's called the Northern Tier route, and there's other cyclists who are doing the route. So there's always going to be other people along the way that you're going to run into. I had people asking me if I was going to pack, if I was going to bring a firearm. And I was like, absolutely no way. And really, for me, it boiled down to self-awareness, keeping track of making sure I had enough to eat and drink every day, knowing where I was intending to end up at the end of the day, having other people know what my plan was so that I could check in with them and they could check in with me. So, we always sort of knew where things were. And really, that was enough. There was only one day, one incident that I ever felt unsafe, creeped out, uncomfortable. And I was aware of it. I saw it happening and I knew what I needed to do to get myself out of the situation. And it may not have even been a real thing, but it was enough. It caught my attention, and I decided I was supposed to stay in this one particular town. And there was somebody who drove by me who gave me a look behind his mirrored sunglasses, and I just was like, I'm not comfortable. I don't think I'm going to sleep well if I stay here tonight. So I pulled out my map. I looked ahead. There was no place to stay in a reasonably close distance. So that was a little bit frightening. But I saw that there was one of those libraries ahead of me. So I got myself to the library quickly before they closed, and they got on the phone and helped me find a place to stay that night. I ended up staying in the home of a United Methodist pastor and his wife, and we had a lovely evening. And I felt perfectly, safe doing that. But really, it's about self-awareness, of the situation, watching how things develop or don't develop. Yeah. And then for me, anybody who knows me knows that you want to keep Jen fed. You don't let her get too hungry. So I always made sure I had plenty of things to eat.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, I had this vision that when I did this trip, I was going to be able to stop at produce stands all along the way, because it's part of the farm belt is across the northern tier of our country. And unfortunately, I was a little too early, so I came through in June and July, and there wasn't a lot being harvested at that point. but there were a few places. This was in Vermont. And right before I met up with a friend actually in Burlington, yeah, the people at Smiley's were super nice. They had all these, they actually ended up having a lot of snack foods like, packaged nuts and things. And I stocked up on those things because they just didn't have a lot of produce. But it was hard to resist taking a photo of this sign and this bright green Smiley's produce. Who wouldn't want to stop there and see what they had on offer, right?
I love it. I love it. The only thing they're missing is they didn't put a smiley face on there.
I know. They need a marketing person.
So one of the other things, and we had talked about this, before about, that economic connection of people who are on these bike tours and going in, stopping in at various cafes where this particular image, you're posing out in front of Muddy Waters Cafe. One of the themes that came up, I can't remember which interview it was. It might have been with Heidi or it might have been a different guest on the podcast, but we talked about how I think a really important thing is, honing in and leaning into what you had mentioned is that when you're doing a trip like this, you do have that opportunity for multiple stops. Like you had mentioned, on a 200-mile stretch, you're going to be popping into a multitude of different places. And I like to reinforce that, hey, even if you don't need it, if you're stopping in at a place, buy something. Had that interaction, that opportunity to do this. And we would do that on some of our rides out of Boulder, where, we can do a loop and whatever. And we love to stop at this one little cafe / market in the town of Hygiene. And like on a given weekend, probably 200 or 300 cyclists will stop at this place. And, even if you don't need it, it's like, take that opportunity, pop in, get a little something, say hello. That reinforcement of the bikeonomics of what this means is I think, really, really important. Why did you want to share Muddy Waters Cafe image with us?
So the Muddy Waters Cafe, I had learned about from working in the office. So, we hear from cyclists all the time about great experiences they have, places that they stopped. And we had people talking about this cafe regularly. It's situated along the Erie Canal. So, and there's a trail that follows the Erie Canal. It's called the Erie Canalway Trail. And so I intentionally wanted to make sure I rode that part of it and got to stop here at Muddy Waters. And what's really unique about riding along the Erie Canalway Trail is that at all of the locks where boats can stop, they also allow cyclists to stop in and camp. And so the lock station was right next door to this cafe. So I was able to stop at the lock station and camp there. They also had laundry available. You could do, they had a little mini laundromat sort of thing. And they allowed me to camp, I think it was for free. And so I stopped in and I had breakfast at Muddy Waters the morning I was leaving. This woman was the owner, and her best friend from, I think she was from California, was there and was visiting. And as it turns out, her best friend's daughter lived in Missoula, which is where I was from at the time. So, you just never know where those connections are going to come from when you start talking to people. And yeah, so this one was just extremely generous to me and the mission of adventure cycling, of, inspiring and supporting people to do these big bike trips. It was a great overnight.
And again, that reinforces that concept that we had talked about earlier about the good in people that are out there. It's like once you're able to start having these conversations and making human connections, it's like that whole 7 degrees of separation. It's like, oh yeah, no, we might even know people in common before. In fact, you and I were having that whole, a couple different layers of separation conversation before we hit the record button. And that's the beauty of this type of travel, is that when you are traveling closer to human speed, you can have these human interactions.
Right. Yeah.
You can also have interactions with Canadian geese, too.
Yes. And this was actually at a Canadian campground, oddly enough. So this was the morning I was leaving. This was in St. Clair, Ontario. Part of the route was on the north side of Lake Ontario or Lake Erie, and that was one of my favorite sections. The roads there, the traffic was almost nil. So it felt like I was riding on a bike path much of the time. It was a very, very cool experience. So this was my last day in Canada because there's a river there at the border. So I was coming back from brushing my teeth and I couldn't resist. I had to capture this re-sunlight sort of glinting off of things of my campsite from the night before. And then I went and rode to a little ferry station and re-enter the U.S. in Michigan, where I think the next slide or the next photo is there was another USBRS route. It was USBR 20, which is one of I got to ride that all the way across the state of Michigan. That one is really well developed. It's been around for quite some time. It's well signed. I think this is Marine City, and so it was a lovely arrival that morning into Marine City.
Yeah, into Marine City and into Michigan. And here
yes, we go. Yeah. So this is in Frankenmuth. Frankenmuth? I'm not sure exactly how you pronounce it.
Yeah, Frankenmuth. Yeah.
Yeah, Frankenmuth. It's a very touristy, very cool town. And I was looking for a cup of coffee. I ended up going into this New Orleans themed cafe and that this man was running and had the hot, what are they? They beignets? Then they make hot donutty things. Oh my gosh. Yeah. That was heaven. And he was just completely enthralled with the fact that I was carrying all this gear, and he found it to be astounding. And so it was really cool. And he reminded me of my deli philosopher that I used to run into. There's a cafe or a deli right across the street from Adventure Cycling offices, and there's a gentleman who works in there that would always, if I was having a bad day or I had a question about life or something, I would go and visit Mark. And so this gentleman really reminded me of Mark. And so it was a sort of a touchstone from home, thousands of miles away.
Yeah, I love it. That is so great. The wide open spaces.
Yeah. Now this is actually in Wisconsin, and that white farmhouse you see in the distance was a Warm Showers location that I stayed at. So Warm Showers.
Yeah. Explain more about Warm. Yeah. Talk about Warm Showers. Yeah. Great organization.
So Warm Showers is a really fabulous organization. If you've heard of, it's similar to couch surfing, but it's very much focused on the bicycle travel community. So folks open their homes for bicycle travelers to come through and get a warm shower, have a place to pitch their tent and lay out their sleeping bag. And there are thousands of these hosts all across the country. Warm Showers is also another nonprofit organization. And, really the thing they ask is that if you have used a Warm Showers host, that after you get home, you become a host yourself and offer up. And so it's another one of those opportunities to meet people face to face, right? And get that injection and reminder of the humans that live in this country. Yeah, and so I did stay at Warm Showers several times. I think maybe 4 or 5 times along my trip. It sometimes can be a little challenging if you don't know exactly where you're going to end up, at a certain time. But the hosts are also typically used to that. That bicycle travelers can, their schedule can get off a little bit sometimes. But it was really a wonderful opportunity. These folks were really politically active, and so it was fun to have some deep conversations around things that were happening at the time. But it was as an introvert, I think that was probably why I only did it a handful of times, because at the end of the day, oftentimes I just was tired, and so to actually interact with other people took another level of energy that sometimes I just didn't have. But I was really grateful for the ones that I did do. And these folks in particular were wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah. I also had the opportunity to interview Sarah Dykman, who did a wonderful trip where she was following the migration pattern of the monarch butterflies.
Yes.
And she talked
book,
about
actually.
that. Yeah, no, fantastic book and fantastic interview. And she talked about the fact that, these, you don't necessarily always have the energy to want to be able to like connect with other people, but at the same time, being open to, popping into a warm showers and connect with people who are gracious enough to open up their homes to these weary travelers that even though you may not have that much energy or are inclined to be more less of an extrovert like I am, want to just kind of, I'm just going to go stay in my tent. You almost always have a good experience to the point where you're glad you made that connection. And speaking of connections, here we go. Adventure Cyclist Bunkhouse. What's the story behind this one?
So the gentleman standing behind me was another one of those legends that I had been hearing about in the office for years. His name is Don Olson. He's a retired dairy farmer. And I think it was back in like 2014 or so. There was a bunch of construction going on the road construction out in front of his home. And there were these cyclists who were riding on the Northern Tier route, the same route that I was riding. And they had stopped in front of his home and they were, referring to this map, and they had this conversation going on. And so Don, being the curious man that he is, came out and said, so, what's going on? How can I help you? And so they introduced him to adventure cycling. And the fact they were, looking for a place to stay, and suddenly this road construction was causing them this problem and stuff. And he's like, well, I have this dairy barn. You're welcome to, throw out your sleeping bag and sleep here tonight. And so they said, great, thanks. And then, he started seeing more cyclists coming through. I mean, you see one, and then all of a sudden you see all of the others. And it's kind of like buying a blue car. All of a sudden, all the cars are blue, right? Because it's on your radar. And so he actually took his dairy barn and converted it into a bunkhouse for cyclists. So I think there's like 4 different rooms that have 2 to 4 beds in them. There's a kitchen in there. He goes to the Walmart down, a few miles away, buys a bunch of stuff, stocks the kitchen, just asks for donations to keep, the stock flowing for people coming through. He's got a solar shower. He's actually got a flush toilet now. I mean, he's been doing this for a long time, and he's a legend. He's definitely a legend on this trip. And so there was a must. I had to have an overnight, and I think I ended up. I guess I just did the one night. This was ended up being a rendezvous point for me and some friends that joined me for what turned out to be the last 10 days of my trip. We rode from Dalbo, west across part of Minnesota at that point. So, but yeah, he was just purely delightful. And he had a whole cupboard of, coffee mugs. So there was a coffee pot there. And so the morning I was there, I was sitting out on the porch, drinking my coffee from his little cute Dalbo coffee mug. And I said, Don, if I were an unscrupulous person, I would just take this mug and stick it in my bag, and you'd never see it again. And he just looked at me and he goes, if you want it, you can have it. So I did. I took it home, and I still have coffee out of it pretty regularly. It's a great little sweet memento of the time and the man. He ended up taking me all over his farm and showing me all the things that he does there. And but again, it's one of those things. He didn't know anything about bicycle travel. He just totally trusted these people that were being vulnerable on their bicycles. And then he built this place for people to land. It's wonderful. And he's known around the world, actually. A friend that I met through and working at Adventure Cycling, who's from Scotland, did a whole video on Don and has it posted out there on YouTube, I'm sure, somewhere. So yeah, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, our good friend, Ryan Van Duzer talks about, this they call them trail angels, is that, there's these people who are, supporting these, the folks that are on these adventures. And yeah, they truly are trail angels. Yeah, it's good stuff. And you can tell we're in Minnesota now.
Yep, for sure. The sign shows me the Paul Bunyan Trail and the Heartland Trail. Those are really fabulous trails. I had known about these because at the time, Adventure Cycling was offering some what they would called family fun adventures. And so there was a family trip that started in, well, I'm going to maybe misspeak, but it went through at least Bemidji, Minnesota, and took in these trail systems. And I can't wait to go back. I want to do these trails again. What's really cool for me about these particular trails is they are not like sort of your typical rail trail in that they are not necessarily always straight and flat. There's some actually pretty good little climbs on the Heartland State Trail, and they were wonderful because they're, separated from traffic. You have all these trees around you. If you go the right time of year, the fields are just filled with beautiful wildflowers, and all of the communities along the way know about bicycle travelers and expect them. And again, they're part of their economy counts on these folks coming through and using these trails. And the state does a relatively good job of keeping them maintained. I mean, Minnesota, I think, is one of the best states to ride your bike in.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's been rated that way many times over the years. Yeah, and there's speaking of Paul Bunyan, you're up close and personal with Paul.
Yes. So that's my good friend Tammy. There, we were. If you want to meet Paul, you can meet him several times along the trail, and they're varying in sizes, and Babe the Blue Walks, and all of the things, which makes it really kind of fun and entertaining.
Yeah.
You got to capture these photo ops.
Yeah, what a great experience. And all these many years later, I mean, obviously that was 2017, and you've had this opportunity to think a little bit about it. You've had this opportunity to think about your career, your 25-year career in adventure cycling, and this opportunity to dig up these memories and talk about it. Close us out. First, talk a little bit about these reflections and being able to think back on that trip, that experience in 2017, and then also more broadly, the legacy of the great work that you did, there at the organization. What are the things that bubble up the most for you and that you'd like to share with the audience?
Boy, that is a lot.
Well, take the trip first, and then we'll talk more globally on the bigger. Yeah,
the trip was definitely. I mean, I was personally at a really pivotal transitional time in my life, and it was really self-confidence building, for one, to get out there and do it by myself, to have lots of opportunities to reflect and think about what was important for me going forward in my next steps. I mean, bicycle travel is a really wonderful way to have those kinds of opportunities where you're not bombarded by TV and news and all the things all the time. And so it really helped me get perspective on life and taking small steps to get a long distance, because you just got to keep going, right? And that definitely is a life philosophy of keep going, even when it gets hard. The other thing that we didn't actually kind of cover on this, but I eat a plant-based diet. And so that was a bit of a challenge at times on this trip. And, it's easy. It's you don't always eat the most healthy, but there's always a lot of calories out there. I mean, Oreos and Fritos, they are vegan, but they're not always the healthiest. And it really helped me to appreciate the life that I have at home and the creature comforts that I get to enjoy at home, when I'm not camping every night or cooking on a small stove. But everything tastes better when cooked in a campsite, I think. I mean, instant coffee and oatmeal are like the height of fine dining when you're on a bike trip. So, I think the self-confidence that I could do this, I had what it took to do this. Yeah.
So pulling back the aperture a little bit, and we're looking at the career and the work that you did, especially in the more recent years of really preparing. And like you said, we talked a little bit about it with the relationship, working hard with the Ride GPS and all that. Any other final thoughts of that legacy and that the mark that you've left behind?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty incredible when I stop and think about it for a minute, because when you're in it on the day to day, you don't necessarily notice it. And yeah, I mean, there was a point in time where I had touched and worked on every single mile of the adventure cycling route network. When I started there was about 20,000 miles on that network, and now there's over 50,000 miles. And that is a testament to the strength of and ongoing endurance of the organization and the support that the organization gets from members who are super excited about bicycle travel. So I spent a lot of years doing cartography and map making, but then I had the opportunity to shift and work on program management. The USBRS, there was a lot of moving parts and pieces and relationships and stakeholders and voices that needed to be elevated and to be heard and brought to the table. And I think I'm probably most proud of those relationships that I built along the way, and that I hope I was able to leave for the folks doing the work now that I am not there. I had a really great team. I was able to be the director of the routes department and oversee all of the program work that we were doing and the route building. And the team that I worked with was extraordinary. I think for me, in the end, it all really it boils down to relationships and connections and those ripple effects. Those are the things that are most important to me, I think, around that experience.
Yeah. And folks who are tuning in, if you're in North America here and you're like, oh wow, I wonder if there's anything anywhere near me. Hey, pop on over to the site. Like you said, you've probably been involved with pretty much all of these. We have one right here in Austin, right here in the Hill Country. We've got the Texas Hill Country Loop. You can see Austin's a part of it. I could literally, out my door, I can hit the road and go out and experience one of these things. And how cool is it to be able to have that opportunity to go out and make those human connections with the people along the way. So my final question for you is, you're no longer with the organization now. What's next for Jennifer? What would you like to do?
Yeah, well, so I sort of touched a moment ago on my food interest. I'm really interested in working in food justice and feeding people. That's my personal passion, and I really want to bring that into my work at this point. And sort of the through line that I see from the work I did at Adventure Cycling to this work is again about connections and overlapping missions and the ripple effects of food and of feeding people. Programs that bring local farm produce to our school systems, not only support those local economies, but educate the kids on where the food they eat comes from and what that looks like and who the farmer is. And all of those things. I really believe deeply that access to food and access to good food in particular is really a right. It's a human right. We should all have access to the food that we need on a day-to-day basis. And that's the work that I really want to dig into now is making a difference in those food systems and building more relationships and making sure the right stakeholders and voices are at the table to hear what their actual needs are and how government and community organizations can serve them and their needs.
Yeah. That reminds me of a recent episode that I did. I think it was episode number 295 with Clayton Garrett and Scott Snodgrass with Meristem Communities, which is they're developing this wonderful walkable and bikeable community just outside of Houston, Texas, of all places. And agriculture is a key theme to it. And so they're layering in a walkable and bikeable village-like environment, selling brand new homes, a brand new community, but it used to be a working farm, and so they're integrating the working farm aspect of it, growing their own food and having fresh produce be a part of this community from the ground up, while also producing more fresh vegetables than the community can even consume. And so being able to sell that through a network of farmers markets, in Richardson, Texas, as well as in the greater Houston area. So I really see that there is these interconnections between walking and biking and active mobility and, this food side of it. So yeah,
right,
especially
right.
Plant-based, that part of it. So good stuff.
Yeah.
Jennifer, thank you so much. This has been such a joy and pleasure having you on the Active Towns podcast.
Yeah, thank you again for the invitation. It's been a wonderful conversation and a walk down a bit of a memory lane and be able to share the work of adventure cycling. Like I said, the big 50th anniversary is coming up, and there's going to be lots of things to celebrate.
Yeah, fantastic. And I need to connect with you one of these days in person up in the Portland area, the Beaverton area, and we'll have to do an on-bike interview next time.
Yeah, that would be great. The Banks to Vernonia Trail is really a fabulous destination. So I would encourage you to check it out if you make it out here.
Fantastic. It's a date. We'll make that happen.
Okay, sounds good.
Hey, thank you all so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Jennifer Hamelman. And if you did, please give it a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, and share it with a friend. And if you haven't done so already, I'd be honored to have you subscribe to the channel. Just click on the subscription button down below and be sure to ring that notifications bell. And if you're enjoying this content here on the Active Towns channel, again, please consider supporting my efforts by becoming an Active Towns ambassador. Super easy to do. Just click on the join button right down below, or head on over to activetowns.org. Click on the support tab at the top of the page, and there's several different options, including Patreon. Patrons do get early and ad-free access to all my video content, as well as buy me a coffee, and again, YouTube super thanks right down below, as well as making a contribution to the nonprofit. Again, every little bit helps and is very much appreciated. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. And until next time, this is John signing off by wishing you much activity, health, and happiness. Cheers. And again, just want to send a huge thank you to all my Active Towns ambassadors supporting the channel financially via YouTube memberships, YouTube super thanks, as well as making contributions to the nonprofit and joining my Patreon. Every little bit adds up and is very much appreciated. Thank you all so much.